To Romans chapter 8, verses 18 to 30. It will be on the screens, but it'd be helpful for you to have it in front of you as well, particularly as we look into it in a bit more depth. It's on, if you've got these blue Bibles, it's on page 1135. If you don't have one, by all means get up and go to the back and grab a copy of the Bible. Now you're welcome to do that. So Romans chapter 8 on page 1135. This time of year, we often do a sermon of the year, we call it. So something that I've preached before, that I don't just recycle, but I rework in order to give it a kind of New Year focus. So that's the idea behind Sermon of the Year. And this year I was asked to preach in one of our partner churches, Cornerstone Church in Abergavenny, and they asked me to preach on Romans chapter 8, verses 18 to 30. And I enjoyed it, so I thought I would share it with you as well. And I thought it would be particularly appropriate for this occasion on New Year's Eve. So Romans chapter 8, verses 18 to 30. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those he predestined, he also called. Those he called, he also justified. Those he justified, he also glorified. Right, this is a safe place. No judgments passed here. So with the rain that we've had this morning, who's groaned already about the weather? Hands up, who's groaned about the weather? A few of us. With the last week that we've had, with lots of rain, ruining Christmas Day walks and so on, who's groaned about the weather this week? A few more hands. There we go. We're being a bit more honest. We often have bad weather, don't we? And we as Brits, if we're British here this morning, we are very good at moaning about the weather. If you're not British, you look on us with dismay and despair, I'm sure. What are these British people like? In fact, I think it must be one of the requirements of passing the British citizen test that you have to be able to moan about the weather in order to become a British citizen. Now, there may be times when our groans are sinful. There might be a cultural sin of moaning about the weather that perhaps we need to address at some point, but that's for a sermon for a different day. For this morning, I want to encourage you to groan. I want to encourage the good of groaning this morning. You see, we groan when we're dissatisfied with something, when we think something should be like this, but instead it's like this, and I'm not happy about that. It's then that we groan, isn't it? So this section of Romans is encouraging us to groan. With the weather, when we think we want it to be dry and it's miserably wet, that's when we groan. With this section of Romans, the groaning is encouraged because of a dissatisfaction with the way that things are and an expectation that it ought to be like that. And an expectation that even one day it will be like that. So we groan because at the moment it's like that, not like that. So let's get groaning together. In this section we see 3 different groaners and 3 different aspects about what they're longing for and what they're groaning about. So the first of those is creation that groans for God's children. I don't know if we've got any fans of Peppa Pig in the room right now. Some of you, there we go. For those who haven't got a clue, for those who didn't have the benefit of watching it in their childhood, Peppa Pig is a TV program about a pig called Peppa. It's rocket science, brilliant. And in the town that she lives, there are loads of other animals. She's not the only other animal. So there are all kinds of different animals. You have Zoe Zebra, Richard Rabbit, and Thingy Pony. I can't remember his name. It begins with P, would you be surprised? And the sheep. I can't even remember what that one's name is, but it begins with an SH or something. Now, all of these different animals, they live in Peppa Pig's world. And they act like people. So these animals, they talk, they walk on 2 legs, they go to school, they go to work, they live in houses, they drive cars, they do all the normal things that we do as human beings. But the funny thing is, they have pets. And so you've got this animal, this pig, that has a goldfish as its pet. And they also have hamsters and lizards and stick insects and all of these creatures as their pets. But their pets, they don't talk. Their pets, they don't walk on 2 legs. So some animals have the privilege of behaving like human beings, whereas other animals are the pets that do what animals do in our world. They do nothing except, eat and make noises. So some of these animals are characterized by being human beings. Now, you're a clever bunch, I know that. So the technical term for this is anthropomorphism. Now, yes, I did have to look that one up. Anthropomorphism is where a non-human being is given human characteristics. So when an animal is given these characteristics of being like a human being, that's called anthropomorphism. And that's what Paul is doing here. He's doing it very subtly. So he depicts the whole of creation, the sun, the clouds, the rivers, the trees, all of the animals. He depicts them all doing this very human thing that we all do, groaning. And they are groaning because they have been subjected to frustration. They groan, like we all do, because something is not the way we think it should be. We are frustrated by that, and we groan. So it's like as if the mountains, I don't know if you can see them today because the clouds are so bad, but if you go outside, look at the mountains and think afterwards, think of them as saying this: gosh, I'm so frustrated that I'm not able to be as I'm meant to be. Think of the trees as groaning and saying, how annoying that decay happens and that one day we're all going to die. Isn't that rubbish? Think of the trees saying that. Or think of the fish. If you've got fish at home, think of them as saying, this stupid curse that we're under, this is worse than this is worse than giving birth. This is terrible. It's not as bad as kidney stones. They're the worst ever. For those who don't know, I had kidney stones recently. I keep referring to it. The deep truth in all of this is that even the natural world Even the inanimate world out there has been disrupted by the sin that we have brought into the world as human beings when we first sinned. Even the natural world, as beautiful as it is, as we often see, it is not as it should be. It is not as it could be. As amazing as it is not perfect. So when a strong wind is blowing through, we've had a lot of that recently, the wind is sighing. When a heavy shower happens, the clouds are weeping. When the earth quakes, it is trembling with uncontrollable sadness. When the sun beats down, it is righteously angry at the condition this world is in. When the thunder claps, it is shouting in rage. And it's not just in light of the first sin that happened in Adam and Eve, as we read about at the beginning of our Bibles. It's in light of our ongoing condition, our ongoing sin, as we continue to sin against God, as we continue to not take care of this creation, the world that God has given us to look after. All of that then generates this increasing groaning, as we're often experiencing today. The longing of creation is right there in verse 19. Creation is eagerly waiting. It's groaning as it waits, and it is waiting for one thing. The end of verse 19, it is waiting for the children of God to be revealed. Creation is waiting for the time when Jesus returns and finally says, all of these are my people. All of these, definitively and specifically, are the ones that I gave my life to bring to myself. All of these are the children of God that I've given my life for all of eternity, so that they could be mine for all of eternity. That's what creation is groaning for. That's when it will stop its groaning. Because then the universe will be restored. Then all of creation will finally be made perfect once again, set free from the curse, set free from all of its frustrations. It is then that creation will be able to itself experience God's glory with us who are God's children. But at the present time, until that time, creation is groaning. And it all groans, waiting for God's children to be revealed. The second set of groaners are God's children, who are waiting for redemption. So God's children groan for redemption. So for this part, it's not just creation that groans. God's children also groan. So we as Christians, we groan. We groan for a redemption that is still to come. Now, in what Paul has been writing before this, he's just been saying that if you are a Christian, you have been adopted into God's family as his child. So have a look in verse 15. It says that we've received God's Spirit, and the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. So if you're a Christian, you are in God's family as his child, adopted, and you have received God's Spirit to bring that adoption about. And that is what has been done for you. That has already happened. When you become a Christian, you become God's child. But now the adoption that it's talking about is an adoption that is still to come. So this is in verse 23, where it talks about we who have the Spirit, we groan as we're waiting for our adoption to sonship. So which is it? Is Paul getting confused here? Have we been adopted as God's children, which is what verse 15 said, or are we going to be adopted as God's children, as verse 23 says? The answer is yes. Yes to both of them. There's something you may have heard of as the now and not yet tension in the Bible. And it goes a little bit like this, the now, not yet tension. Has God's kingdom come now? Yes. Is God's kingdom still to come? Yes, both now and not yet. Are we as Christians made holy now? Yes. Are we yet to be made holy? Yes. The now holy, the not yet holy. So with this, have we been adopted now? Yes. Are we still to be adopted at some point in the future? Yes. We've been adopted now. We're not yet adopted as well. So there is absolutely a very real sense in which we can say now that we are God's children, if we are Christians. We belong to him. We have a relationship with God, an intimate, close relationship whereby we can call him, as it says here, Abba, which means father or even dad. That sense of closeness and familiarity that we can have with God, that we can call him dad, that exists for the Christian now. But there is still so much of what it means to be a child of God that we're still waiting for, that is still to come. And much of that is to do with what the end of verse 23 gives us, the redemption of our bodies. You see, just like creation is not how it was originally made to be, and so it is groaning away, waiting for that being restored to a perfect condition, so we can groan about our bodies not being the way that our bodies are supposed to be, the weakness of your body. And you don't have to live long before you know about the weakness of your body. When you're young, you're not so aware of it, are you? You're still vulnerable to the odd cold and sniffle and whatever else, and some young people have to deal with some terrible debilitating conditions. But on the whole, the younger that you are, the less aware you are of the weakness of your body. But you don't have to get far beyond your 20s to know that your joints are beginning to ache. Your eyes are starting to fail. Your ears can't quite catch the sound the way they used to. And you know, some old people are really good at groaning about this. Now, don't rebuke them. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They are groaning about their bodies the way that the children of God are supposed to groan about their bodies. Now, we've got a caveat with this, with so long as they are groaning with a longing for eternity rather than just groaning for the sake of being miserable, of course. But when old people or, people beyond their 20s are groaning about the weakness of their body in a sense of, I long for that new body where everything will be restored, that is a good and godly thing for us to groan about. We have God's Spirit in us, and he renews our spirit. He is doing that now. He has and is renewing our spirit. So we have this new spiritual life within us. And that is like the first ripe fruits that you get on the cherry tree in June. That's what we have now. We have the early harvest now. We have the renewal of our spirits now. That is going on. But the renewal of our bodies, that is the late harvest. That is the apples that you're still picking off your tree in late August or into September or even October. The late harvest. That is what we're still longing for. Our spirits are renewed, the early harvest. The late harvest is still to come. The renewal of our bodies is still to come Is still to come. So just as when Jesus returns, the whole of the physical world around us will be made new, so our bodies will be made new as well. Made to enjoy that new creation that Jesus will remake. And that is our hope. And that is what we are groaning for. It's not something we already have, because that's not hope. Our bodies, we can't expect them to have full redemption now, because then there is nothing else to hope for. but it is something that we know for certain is coming. So it's not an empty hope, which means we have to learn to be patient. Even as we groan, we have to learn to be patient as we wait for the return of Jesus and for the renewal of our bodies. So as creation is groaning, waiting for the full number of God's children to be revealed, so we who are God's children, we are also groaning. We're groaning as we are waiting for the final redemption of our bodies. Time now for the third groaner, the Spirit who groans in our weakness. So we groan because our bodies are weak, and yet God has given us help for our weakness. And the help that he has given in our weakness is himself. He has given us the Spirit. And our weaknesses are many. We've mainly focused on the weaknesses of the physical ailments of the body, but there are so many other weaknesses that we experience in our bodies. So, for example, our weakness with temptation would be another example. We know how easy it is for us to give in to temptation. The weakness in not knowing what God's purposes are for us, our limitedness in that sense. I'm sure we pray about our weaknesses, don't we? For those of you who experience ongoing health conditions, the weakness of the body in older age, I'm sure you pray about those. But our ability to pray about these things, it sometimes maxes out, doesn't it? Eventually, as we've been praying for this weakness of our body, for that weakness of our ability to resist temptation or whatever else it is, eventually we don't know what else to pray. Eventually we reach our limit in knowing the right way to pray about a certain situation. Many of you have experienced this, haven't you? And that is when this wonderful promise kicks in verse 26. Read it with me. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God. There's a lot in that. But it's talking about when we have reached those limits in our finite human nature, God's infinite Spirit helps us. We have limits, God's Spirit doesn't. And then he prays for us. When we're at the end of ourselves, God's Spirit then prays for us. And have a look at the way he does that in verse 27. This is absolutely mind-blowing. So as God searches our hearts, he knows us, he knows our hearts, so God, the Father, also knows the mind of the Spirit. Because the Father and the Spirit are one, the Father knows the mind of the Spirit. So God the Father, who knows our hearts, he also knows the mind of the Spirit. And so there's a lining up in what is going on here, which means the Spirit is able to pray on our behalf in a perfect way. What's more, as the Spirit prays, interceding for us, he prays according to God's will. Again, because the Spirit and the Father are one, the Spirit is able to pray exactly what God's will is for us. We don't always know what God's will is, but God knows what God's will is. The Spirit knows what God's will is. And so as the Spirit is praying on our behalf in ways that we can't even comprehend, the Spirit prays exactly what is needed for us and exactly what is in line with God's will. That is mind-blowing, isn't it? But that's what the Spirit does on our behalf when we reach the end of our ability to pray. So the short of all this is, because the Father and Spirit are united as God, and because the Spirit has joined himself with us and even prays on our behalf, so his prayers are exactly what needs to be prayed for us, even when we don't know what to pray for ourselves. The Spirit prays perfectly for you, even when you can't pray for yourself. That's great, but it gets even better. And you could have spent just the whole of our time on these last few verses, and you'll have to meditate on them in the week that is ahead and in the year that is ahead, perhaps. Make that a project. Why not memorize the whole of these last 3 verses? Verse 28, it conveys that God is working for our ultimate good. This famous verse that many of us already know. God is working for our ultimate good no matter what circumstances we are going through. No matter how hard life has got, God is working for our ultimate good. And our ultimate good is his glory and our participation in that glory in eternity. God is working for that no matter what we are going through. Whatever we face, whatever trials we experience, God is using that to bring us to his glory. Which is why Paul interrupts himself in verse 29 to speak about that final glory of being conformed like the image of his Son. That is our ultimate good, the glory of being like Jesus in eternity. So verses 29 and 30, they convey the process that all of this goes through. It begins in eternity past, foreknowing and predestining us, choosing us. That's in eternity past. And then in time, in the present time, he calls us and he justifies us. He actually brings us to himself and he sets us as being in the right with himself. That happens when we become Christians. We are called to come and follow Jesus. And we are set right with God in what Jesus has done for us. And then the last bit, the last phrase, is of what is in eternity to come. He's also glorified us. But it's so certain that Paul says it in the past tense here. It's as so good as done that he's able to say it as if it is already done. It is so certain that we will reach eternity and reach that status as being glorified in the image of Christ and present with God that Paul is able to say, it's done. It's done already. The reason those bits are here is to give us a sense of certainty, to give us a sense of confidence that even as we feel the frustration and the groaning now, that is so certain. If God has already foreknown us and predestined us, if he has done something to make us his own in eternity past, then we can be confident that, of the reality of what we now experience, the calling and the justifying, which means we can also be confident of what is to come in the future, the glorification that we will one day experience when Jesus returns, when we are made like him, when we're able to experience God's home forever. So if God has done that for us in eternity past, then he will bring us through this time that we're currently groaning about to that time which is to bring us into his glory in eternity future. Now, normally I would discourage groaning, especially if it's about the weather. God has given us weather for a reason. He's given us rain for a reason. He knows best. We trust him, even if we don't like the rain. He does it for his reasons. Groaning can be sinful. We've got to be careful about that. But for this very particular aspect of our Christian lives, groaning is a godly thing. Groaning that longs for God to sort everything out, to fix the brokenness of this world. Groaning that trusts that he will one day do it, but we're still longing for it. That is good and godly groaning. If you're not yet a Christian this morning, then you probably already have a sense that there's something very broken about this world. That there's something that needs fixing. If you've never come to realize that the only one who can fix this broken world is God, which he accomplishes through his son Jesus, then I hope you've got a sense of that this morning. A sense of that makes you want to know this God. Jesus fixes this world by first dying to pay for our sin. He has to deal with the root cause of the problem before he then deals with the problem itself. He pays for our sin in giving his life, but he also rises again from death to bring about a new life that is in him, a new life that renews our spiritual beings. He ascends into heaven to take everything under his rule, his rightful rule as the Lord of the universe, which means he is dealing with the issue that we've brought into being, the problem, the brokenness that sin has done to our world. So if we're not yet Christians, if we will come to trust in him, if we will follow him, then we get to participate in the fix. We get to join in the solution that God is bringing into this world. If you become a Christian, then you will be part of that new world when it is fully restored. So if you're not yet a Christian, today of all days, come to Jesus. Trust in him. And if you are a Christian, this week you have permission to moan, to groan, to join in with creation as it groans, as we all long for the revealing of God's children, as we groan about the longing for the redemption of our bodies, as we feel the weakness that we currently experience, to join in with the groaning of the Spirit as he prays in ways that we cannot even fathom, praying what is good for us, what is right for us, what is best for us, as he prays according to God's will and knowing what is going on in our hearts and lives. As we groan with confidence. We groan with knowledge that God has chosen us, that he has saved us, and that he will bring us to his eternal glory. Let's pause for a moment, and we might want to spend some time just pondering that, reflecting on that. Maybe you want to spend a minute groaning before God about the right things. Maybe you want to start by praying for the redemption to come. Let's pause for a moment and pray in our hearts. Father God, we thank you that in eternity past you knew us and you chose us. And in our present experience, you have called us to yourself. You've set us right with yourself. All of this by your Son giving his life on our behalf to pay for our sin, to make us right with you. Thank you so much for this. Thank you that we can long for that day when we will be glorified. It's as good as done that we can say it's past tense. It has happened, and yet it is still to come. And so, Lord, help us to long rightly for the redemption of our bodies, for the restoration of creation, for the taking away of sin, for the experiencing of eternity that is still to come, where we will live with you forever as your people. Help us to groan in right and godly ways. May you have all of the glory. Amen.